Okay, should be recording to a cloud somewhere. You can see my screen, right? The full presentation, or it's the presentation mode?
Yes, okay. I can see that.
Okay, so thank you once again to Federico for the introduction. Yes, as you maybe have guessed, I'm from Ireland and not from Italy, even though I've been working here for many years. So this talk today is just about the ERIES project. It's something that has been funded quite recently by the European Commission, and it's let's say a little bit of a strange project. So it takes a moment just to explain what exactly it is, what the objective is, how it works, and how you can get involved. So this is the objective of the talk today, about how, let's say, people like you involved in wind engineering could get involved in something like this and take advantage of the opportunities that are available. Okay, so just a quick overview of the project and some basic information before we get into the details. So the objective of this is to provide transnational access. We will see what this is in a second. We're going to give this access to research infrastructures, essentially laboratories, but the technical terminology that we use in by the European Commission is research infrastructures. And the idea is to conduct research that will advance the frontier knowledge in seismic, wind, and geotechnical hazards. So as you've heard already, I'm quite involved in the seismic side of things, where let's say people connected to this call will be more involved in the wind engineering side of things. And then we also have our colleagues in geotechnics. So the idea is to give access to these kinds of different laboratories to do experimental research on these topics. Okay, so it sounds very general and good-willed and as good intentions, but how exactly does that work? We'll see in a second. So just some more details. The funding is coming from the European Commission, the Horizon Europe funding program. The total budget is just over 11 million euros. And the duration of the project is 4 years. We've started in June of this year, and we're running for 4 years until 2026. Some information about the website and email address where you can get information and so on is available on the right-hand side. A lot of this stuff I will go through in this presentation, but everything is available on the web as well. So the first thing to describe really is what exactly is transnational access and what does it offer? It's something that sounds a bit strange, but it's a relatively simple concept. So it's, as part of ERIES, the idea is to offer access free of charge to large collection of high-class experimental installations for earthquake, geotechnical, and wind engineering. So essentially, people can have access to these laboratories free of charge to do research on these topics that I just mentioned. So this access is granted to user groups, so a group of researchers, whose majority, so the majority of this research group is located in a country other than where the experimental installation is located. So this is the transnational idea. So it basically means that a research group, for example, working, the majority of whom work in France, for example, could apply to a research, an experimental installation in Italy. So the idea is to promote this exchange of ideas and collaboration between different countries in the European area. Essentially, it means also that a European or an Italian research group, for example, so me working here in Pavia, Italy, I could not apply to another research infrastructure in Italy if I want to be a part of this project, if I were not involved in the coordination of it. So it let's say forces you to have this transnational aspect as well. And the access part is, as I just mentioned, it's the access to these research infrastructures to do this work, and the costs of which are covered already by the funding we have obtained from the European Commission. So the European Commission has, let's say, put a lot of resources in our hands to carry out a lot of work on these different topics that I'll go through in a moment. So we have, let's say, if we want to think about it, a menu of different research infrastructures, all of which are quite advanced and well known in the areas. We have funding that can cover the expenses to use these, and we just have some conditions about the groups who can apply and actually go and use these. Okay, so the user groups will have the cost of experimentation directly covered by the ERIES project. So if we have to construct a specimen, for example, or the cost of the laboratory staff, this is covered by the ERIES project. And also the travel and accommodation expenses. So let's say you are a research group working in Germany and you want to go and do some research in Portugal. there is a travel budget for you to go and actually witness the testing and to collaborate with the laboratory in Portugal, for example. So that it promotes this this kind of exchange, not just virtually by emails or by Zoom calls, but also in person. So you can go visit the laboratory and also get to know how the testing is done and the different techniques that the laboratory has to offer. Okay. So just in terms of the wind infrastructure. So I've mentioned different themes, the seismic, wind, and also geotechnical. So just focusing a bit on the wind infrastructures, given the nature of this talk today. So some of these research infrastructures that we have on board as part of this project, possibly you will even recognize some of them. So the first column on this table here, the University of Genoa in Italy, the Western University in Canada, the Eindhoven University of Technology in the Netherlands, and also CSTB Nantes in the northwest of France. There is a different number of installations because, as you know, many of these different institutes or universities have more than one laboratory, let's say. So in the case of Genoa, there is the wind tunnel, but also the LIDAR system. And depending on the choices that were made by the different infrastructures or the different partners, we have different options available to us, okay? Obviously, the funds and everything are not unlimited, so we have, let's say, a number of foreseen slots or experimental proposals that we anticipate to be able to cover. So this is the last column of the table I'm showing here. So the total availability is saying that given the resources that we have available to us and the relative costs of these of running these laboratories to do tests, we expect that we can cover about this number of experimental tests in these different laboratories. Okay, so just to give a quick overview, and I won't get into the details because I'm a little bit not up to speed as some of the rest of you would be, but just to give an idea of some of these options available. As I mentioned before, there would be the wind tunnel in the University of Genoa. So just let me just hear what exactly that consists of. Also some technical details which are available on the project website, but also here just for your information. Again, some features of these. So the idea of what can be done in this laboratory and what they expect that could be done as part of this project is also here. So again, these are just some animations that are made available by the partner. Then if we move to the facility available in the northwest of France, so in Nantes, for example, we have the Jules Verne climatic wind tunnels. So here there are actually two different installations. So we have what are called the dynamic unit and the thermal unit. So it's maybe a little bit more complicated, but it's the same facility with different capabilities. So in this case, they have different objectives. Some technical details are given here as well on this laboratory that is available, and so on and so forth. Coming back to Genoa again, not talking just about wind tunnels, there's also this what we're calling the LIDAR system. So this is something that was installed in 2018 in the port of Genoa, and it has been searching for these downburst outflows, gust fronts, and water spouts produced by these thunderstorm clouds approaching from the sea. So essentially just measuring not what we're reproducing in a laboratory, but what we're actually seeing in nature itself. So let's say live record, not live, but real world recordings that can be recorded and made available to understand these different phenomena. So that just a quick overview of some of the laboratories there. Coming back to what it is we hope to do in these. So as I mentioned, the project has a different set of laboratories available as part of it. It's like a consortium, let's say. And a lot of resources available from the European Commission to do this transnational access that I mentioned a moment ago. But obviously there are some, not some restrictions, but some idea behind this should be clear. So the main goal of the project, what we said as coordinators when we were applying for this grant from the European Commission was, okay, we can put together a team of great laboratories, but also we want to address these specific goals in these specific areas. So we had an idea of generally what we want to tackle. Okay, so the main goals were, as we're seeing on the right-hand side here. So loss-driven design and mitigation approaches, risk quantification and prioritization, and also green and sustainable development. So the idea is that through these different research, let's say, mini grants that we will be giving through the transnational access, we're hoping that all of these projects will touch these different goals in some way or another. So the different people who will come and access our laboratories or go to different laboratories as part of ERIES will be having projects that somehow advance the frontier knowledge on these different themes. Okay. So this is the main idea. We have these different research goals, but then also we have different hazards and different research areas as well. It's, let's say, just to put some structure on the project and give an idea of how we can connect all of the different projects we have together to show that there is a common theme and a common goal behind everything, not just in terms of focusing on one specific issue in the earthquake side of things or the geotechnical side of things, but also on a bigger picture, that there is a general consensus behind what is happening. So if I take these three different research goals and just to give you maybe a more graphical idea of what this is, so we consider these different research goals. So the loss-driven, the risk, the green and sustainable side of things. These are what we're calling the research goals 1, 2, and 3. So ideally, these projects that we would have, these grants, let's say, that we are giving, would be touching on one of these, one or more of these different research goals. But then we mentioned these things called research areas. And what exactly are those? Well, that's just, let's say, how we can categorize our projects or the grants that will be applying to us, how they can categorize a little bit the areas in which they are focusing the research. So if I think about the research area number 1, the built environment, all this essentially means it's just a built environment in which we live every day. For example, research related to the residential housing, the office space in which we work every day, the commercial spaces that we occupy on a regular basis. So, for example, if I think about my background in seismic engineering, if I'm working on a specific problem that we see in residential buildings, well, that's obviously something more focused on research area number 1. So we're looking more at the built environment that we interact with every day on a single level. Moving then to research area number 2, we have this thing called critical infrastructure. So this is maybe focusing a bit more on a regional level. So not just focusing on a single structure like a building or an office or a commercial space, but more the connected infrastructure that help society and the economy move. So I'm thinking things like dams, things like bridge networks, things like ports and airports, for example. These are the critical infrastructure that we depend on their functionality to have society and the economy moving smoothly. Okay. Then the third one would be the industrial facilities. So almost like critical infrastructures. There's a little bit of overlap here, but industrial facilities in the sense of the things like oil refiners, things like production plants, energy production, things like that. So obviously those kinds of building structures and things that you could examine in that context would be a little bit different from critical infrastructures and also a good bit different from the built environment. So let's say I have a project that I'm looking at the seismic performance of nuclear power plants. Obviously, that's not something that we encounter in our everyday life in the built environment. It's more of an industrial facility. Okay. And the last research area is what we're calling advanced technologies. And this is a little bit different because it's leaving space for things that, let's say, technologies that we think could complement everything else, but have their own little area to themselves. So I'm thinking of special devices, special technologies that we can use in many different contexts. And we want to test out that kind of device or product. So, for example, if a company is manufacturing some kind of device that is, let's say, more resistant to wind hazard, more resistant to seismic hazard, and they would like to test this or proof of concept or develop this product a bit more, there's also space for these kinds of developments inside this project, because we're not just going to focus on apartments, offices, commercial space, bridges, and oil refiners, but also on the, let's say, technological advancements that we can make on a very specific component level that could maybe have an impact on a broader scale. And these are the goals and areas, so they kind of cross over between them, but also we have the hazards. So let's say the three different options of hazard: the seismic, wind, and geotechnical. So personally, I come from the seismic side of things, whereas we also have partners and colleagues involved from the wind side of things, but also the geotechnical. So just an example of how this structure, how a grant proposal or a transnational access proposal could fit into this kind of structure is, imagine I'm a user group leader, and I want to apply for a grant, and I want to study the effects of earthquakes on their residential buildings to investigate a novel retrofitting technique that will contribute towards the loss space design and mitigation approaches. So already within that, you can describe your project in one line, but you can also categorize it and find out which box you should be putting it into to show how it fits the overall goal of the ERIES project. So in the case of the effect of earthquake, obviously that's a seismic hazard, the impacts on the residential buildings, so that's the built environment, and looking at novel techniques and retrofitting, that's also looking at the goals of loss-driven design and mitigation, for example. If that was a technique that was looking at energy efficiency, for example, we'd also be touching on the research goal number 3, so the green and sustainable development. So it's just about how to categorize and how to make sure that your project is, say, matching up with the overall thrust or the overall goal behind the ERIES project. Okay. A lot of this stuff is let's say a very simple graph of what I showed on the previous slide, but a lot of the details and more technical stuff referring to past studies, etc., is all available on the project website. So it's that address listed on the screen, and you can see the research goals that I've just mentioned. There's a nice big description just to show exactly what we mean when we talk about this, and also in the case of the research areas. So who exactly is involved here? So I mentioned some different partners around Europe and some of the people involved in more of the wind side of things. So just to give you an idea of who we are and where we are. So in total there are 13 partners. So we have and the majority of whom are located within Europe. So first and foremost, we have us as the coordinators in Pavia. So IUSS, or use as they say in Italian, is the project coordinator. So I'm essentially coordinating the project with Professor Gian-Michele Calvi, who's the principal investigator of this as well. So we're doing a lot of the coordination work and the hands-on, let's say, making sure everything is running smoothly. But as part of that, then the different logos you see on the right-hand side are all of the different laboratories or the research institutes that are involved in the project and have different complementary experimental facilities. So all of these, for example, could have seismic testing facilities, or wind testing, or geotechnical, for example. If I'm looking at the first one here, the EU Center, for example, this is the building that's actually right in front of me, outside of my office. This has a lot of shaking tables and different facilities to work on the seismic side of things. But then if I look at Western University, or Windy, I think some of you involved in wind would know that this is as the name might imply, it's involved in wind research. Okay, and the same thing with Genoa, CSTB, and so on. Okay, so and the same thing in Eindhoven in the Netherlands. This is a general map of where everybody is located, so you can see there's relatively good distribution around Europe between the different countries. But also we have the nice opportunity of having the involvement of the partner in Canada that I just mentioned. So Western University here in London, up essentially near Toronto, in the north of America. So while it's not in Europe, it's still participating as an external organization as part of this project. So they're involved as if they were a European laboratory. But obviously they're located on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. So what exactly? So this was mentioned before, not to really get into too many details here, but just for completeness, this slide is here. All of the different partners, the different research infrastructures, and the different installations. So essentially, as I mentioned, the transnational access is giving access to a large collection of these high-class experimental installations for the earthquake, geotechnical, and wind engineering in Europe and in Canada. The distinction I'm making here is just on the terminology, because it may be confusing just to know what exactly is meant by what and what exactly we're referring to. So this is more of a completeness thing than anything else. So when I say research infrastructure, I essentially mean a university or a research institute or something like that. So for example, the EU Center or the University of Jena would be a research infrastructure. In the case of an installation is just one of the laboratories a research infrastructure could have. For example. And the case of EU Center here, or let's say we'll use the University of Genoa as an example. The ones I mentioned before, the wind tunnel and the LIDAR system, would be the two installations that they have. So just that there, the terminology is clear. Okay, so many partners just have one installation available, but some people have two or even three. Okay. So the structure of the project, so how exactly does it work? I've kind of described a little bit the interaction between us and the European Commission so far. So essentially us as the coordinators, we've signed a grant agreement that essentially secures the funding of 11.6 million euros that I have mentioned before. And this is our job to coordinate this group of, this consortium of laboratories here, that the different partners with the different experimental facilities, to coordinate that and decide how this how all of these research goals and so on would get implemented. But then how exactly does a user group, so the external people like you, for example, connecting to this call, how could you get involved, and what exactly could your role in this project be? So I've essentially put a small little diagram here of potential user groups who would be external people in different countries. Essentially, they will be submitting a proposal. Let's say you go to the website, which we'll discuss in a few moments. Go to the website, see that, oh, okay, the research I'm interested in doing, I could possibly do it in this laboratory. This research goal, these research areas match very well what I have in mind. How about I put together a user group and I make a proposal? This is exactly the idea behind this kind of project. So what exactly would happen here is you would make a proposal, and this would be evaluated by what we're calling the Transnational Access Selection and Evaluation Panel. So this is a panel that is essentially going to evaluate how good your proposal is from a scientific and technical perspective, but also how well it matches what exactly the overall goal of the ERIES project is. So obviously, if you propose something that is completely outside of the scope that I've mentioned so far, it's not going to score very well, because it's not the idea behind the project. The idea behind the project is to give access to these different laboratories for free to different external user groups from different countries. So again, the international collaboration on the topics that we have broadly outlined. So there's some general description, so there's room for specific research on different topics, and this is exactly what we expect the user groups to be applying with. And then the selection and evaluation panel will give their decision on that, and then there will be a ranking, and the proposals will be awarded based on a scoring system, which we will see later on. So this evaluation panel, not to get too much into it, but just to give an idea of what it is, it's the decisions that will be made will be communicated to the relative partners. Okay, we'll see the structure of how this works in a moment. I have the lucky job of coordinating this with the project office. So essentially, what we're doing is we're the focal point of the applications would arrive to us. We will decide then on who exactly is the most suitable members of our evaluation panel, who should be looking at the different proposals, because obviously if a proposal is on seismic engineering, it doesn't make sense to have our experts on wind engineering giving detailed feedback on that kind of proposal if it's not their areas of expertise. So we have different complementary experiences and so on in the panel. As I mentioned, essentially this panel is to assess the feasibility of the user group, and also looking at the technical point of view, and also considering the research infrastructure's own scientific interests. So we'll see a little bit later on that it's not just the opinion of the external panel that counts, but also the opinion of the laboratory that you are applying to. So for example, if you want to go to the laboratory in Portugal, for example, the Portuguese laboratory will give us also their feedback on the proposal, saying, yes, this is technically possible in our laboratory. This is within the expected costs we have that we can cover. And it's also very interesting for us as a laboratory to look at research like this. It's in our own scientific interest, so we would be very happy to have this. The members that I've mentioned before are these people shown on the screen. So possibly some of these you would mention. The person you're seeing here on the top left is the person speaking to you right now. Let's say the people on the bottom row are more involved in the seismic side of things and also the geotechnical side of things, whereas possibly you would recognize from the wind side of things, you would recognize the people on the top row. So we have Luca Caracollia, who's a professor at Northeastern University in the USA, and also Amal El-Awedi, who's assistant professor at Florida International University in the USA as well. So they would be the people in the case of a wind application who would be evaluating who would be evaluating the proposal for us. Okay, we're not directly part of the project, but they are part of our independent panel. Okay. So the calls for proposals. So what exactly I've mentioned how you can apply, but when and how does this work? So it's going to be handled centrally by us, and we've essentially created this system that it's permanently open. So even today, after this presentation, you could go and submit an application. I would maybe not recommend that. Maybe give it some thought first, but the application system is permanently open. So what we've done is we've given some collection and evaluation deadlines. So there are effectively deadlines at which the first one was at the end of September this year, at which we said, okay, all of the applications that we see have been submitted, we will collect them and evaluate them. And then the next collection and evaluation date will be later in the year. So it's essentially the first call that was open. When these are submitted, these are going to be collected and distributed to the relative members of the evaluation panel, like I mentioned, and the evaluation should be returned within about a month after the submission. So when I think about the case of the end of September, we had roughly 1 month for the panel to evaluate and give their decision on the applications received. So we've just communicated just last week the results of the first call, for example, and if I'm not mistaken, there were about 24 proposals, 13 of which were approved, and the approval rating of about 50 something percent, 54%, I think. So this was the first call that we have in the case of September 2022. The next one will be at the very beginning of the new year. So the 8th of January in 2023 will be the next deadline. So if you're watching this now in mid-November, essentially, it could be a good time to let's say get ready and start thinking about preparing your proposal, which isn't that long. We'll talk about the documents that are needed in a moment, but it could be a good idea to be aiming to submit something for the January deadline, because the next one is estimated to be in June 2023 and November 2023 as well. So we're having four different calls depending on the leftover availability we have. But this is the plan for now. Okay. But of course, the updated information is always going to be on the website, and we will communicate this on our LinkedIn page as well, just to if there's any major update that people should be aware about. So how exactly to apply? I mentioned that it's always open, and yes, this is true because we have a Google form. So essentially, we're using this kind of system. And all of the templates are available on the website. So there's a zip file you can essentially download, and some instructions are left in those documents that people should follow. And explanation is given here and also on the website about how to submit these to the Google Form system. Okay, just to highlight, you have to follow these instructions carefully, deleting any of the explanatory text. If there's instructions in the document, obviously you just delete it, and you need to make sure that page limits and other requirements are expected, because if people are let's say taking gross liberties in their preparation of proposals, we won't be considering these for evaluation. So it's important to have things within the limits that have been set out. In addition to the documents that you can submit, let's say a proposal description in text, we have the possibility to give a couple of slides. As you know, a few images can explain more than blocks of text. So in the case of proposals, it's nice to have the scientific description, technical justification of a certain work. But it could be much easier to give a couple of different sketches, different slides to illustrate what exactly you have in mind. So this is something a possibility we're giving as well to the applicants, so they can submit a few slides saying, this is roughly what I want to do. And this is the general idea I have. So it's quite clear to the panel members. Okay. So how does this work? So we have 3 different steps involved here. The first is that actually you require a Google account to do this, but I don't think this is mainly a problem for most people. It just means you need to have something that you can submit a Google form application. So we have three main steps. We have the proposal details, the user group leader, and the annexes that you need to attach to your application. So in the case of the proposal details, it's very basic information. It's just what's your proposal acronym, the title of proposal, which of the three hazards are you focusing on? Is it earthquake, wind, geotechnical, and so on? These that I mentioned before, and which of the four research areas are you focusing on as well? So in the case of the built environment, the industrial facilities, and so on. There has been I mentioned before how in the case of research area number 4, there is a slight difference in the sense that it's focusing on the advanced technologies. But we also have, let's say, a subdivision in what we're calling advanced technologies, because we can talk about mitigation devices. So let's say a product or some kind of device that we can use in different contexts to mitigate these hazards. But also we can focus on advanced technologies in terms of experimental testing. So we can also look, let's say, inwards at the experimental facilities we're using, and maybe try to look at how we can develop the experimental techniques that we implement. So maybe we could try and do something new using our wind tunnels, or shaking tables, or reaction walls, and so on. So maybe we have scope to try out some new things here to develop a new method. Okay, so this is the small distinction there. The next step obviously will be the user group leader. This is essentially what we typically call the principal investigator of a project, but in this case it's the user group leader. So just some information: name, surname, position, organization, and so on. And then one of the important parts then is the country of origin, okay, the organization country. So in the case, this is maybe an important distinction to make when you're submitting an application, is that when we're talking about the organization country, obviously the user group leader is a physical person, right? So I can use myself as an example. So I'll put in my name, my surname, my position, email address, everything, but also the organization I work for. So I'm working for IOSS Pavia here in Italy. Okay, so in this case, on paper, I'm technically an Italian researcher because I'm working for an Italian institute. Okay. So in this case, I would not put Ireland as my organization country, even though the example here has that, because even though I'm an Irish citizen, I'm not Italian, but I'm working for an Italian organization. So that's just an important distinction to make. So let's say, for example, if we have a researcher from Argentina who is working as part of their PhD, or is a professor at a university in France, that person would be listed as a French researcher, okay, even though they're from a completely different country, okay? And we'll see why this distinction in country of organization is important on the next slide. And it's to do with the eligible countries. So obviously it's not a completely worldwide project. It's funded by the European Commission. So obviously there is a European dimension to the project, a European focus. Okay. And what the way this is being handled as part of ERIES is that the user group leader, the institution country, so what I mentioned before, in my case, it would be Italy, for example, it must be within the EU, an EU associated country, and must not coincide with the country in which the TA facility is located. So these are the, let's say, terms and conditions. So the EU member states are shown on the bottom left of the slide here. I think a lot of people would be familiar with these. The associated countries would be countries who are not part of the EU, but as part of Horizon Europe, they're eligible or associated in effect with the different research. What would you call them? The different agreements that have been in place with these external countries and the European Commission. So they're not a part of the EU, but they're involved in these kinds of research programs. So, for example, North Macedonia, in the case of Norway, or Armenia, for example, these are all countries that would be considered involved. Okay. Other associated countries which are not in effect right now, but are listed as being imminent, are the ones on the far right. So if Albania, Morocco, Tunisia, and also the United Kingdom, which is, as you all know, has moved from the first box of being an EU member state to the far right of being an associated country. So it essentially means that the user group leader, their country must be one of these countries. Okay, they must be working at a research institute in one of these countries here. Okay. The information is provided at the link that's shown on the slide, and it's available on the project website as well to get a bit more detail about this. But some important clarifications about this is, okay, the user group leader, it must be in one of these countries here, and also they cannot be applying to a facility in the same country. So as I mentioned before, a research group from Italy cannot apply to another research infrastructure in Italy. It must go to one of the other countries or the other installations available as part of the ERIES project. Two quick clarifications is that the legal entities established in Switzerland or Liechtenstein are not covered by this any agreement currently in force, and apparently, as far as I know, there is no intention to join either. So if there are universities, research institutes in either of these countries, they're not currently associated with this, so they would be participating. They would need to participate as a external country from not from the list shown on the slide. And for obvious reasons, user group leaders or user groups with members from Russia are currently not permitted to be part of the project. Okay. So this is just talking about the user group leader. So who can lead these kinds of projects? They must be from one of these countries listed on the slide. But just to clarify something then, here we're speaking only about the user group leader. Okay, so this would be the user group leader from a country like Portugal can prepare a proposal. But let's say, for example, they would like to have the collaboration of a very good colleague who's working in the United States, for example, who is obviously not part of this list. A common question is, would this be possible to have this participation of this non-eligible country? The answer is yes. They cannot present the proposal as the user group leader, but some involvement is possible. We will see the exact terms and conditions for this later on, but essentially it just means that if there is external participation, it should be well justified, and it also means that the external participation from other countries like the USA, like Japan, like Australia, it's possible, but they cannot be the majority of the user group. Of the entire user group must still be a European research group or user group. Okay. So the annexes are possibly the main part of the proposal. It's essentially, this is the application form, or the things that need to be prepared. So the first one is the application form, which we'll see on the next slide, and these are just attachments that you can attach or upload to the Google Form system. They're to be completed using the templates made available on the project website and submitted using the specified formats on the Google Form. So the first one is the application form. A screenshot is shown on the right hand side, and you can see that there are some instructions there in the blue text. As I mentioned before, all of this blue text would need to be deleted before the submission, but it's there just as a guide to help people fill out the document. The general structure has 4 sections. First, it speaks about the user group, the research infrastructures they intend to apply to, the actual proposal, and then the anticipated schedule of their project proposal. Okay, and the limit for this application is 12 pages. So it's not so long, in the sense that it doesn't require a lot of work to fill out an application form, but also 12 pages can also be a problem that you want to make sure that you have you're quite clear and concise, and it's very easy to understand what you want to achieve within these 12 pages. So in the case of the user group, I mentioned a lot of these issues already. I mentioned the user group leader, which would be essentially the principal investigator, but the user groups defined as the collection of people for one or more institutions eligible to present a TA user project proposal. And the user group leader is the person who is responsible for this entire group. Okay, so the UGL, the user group leader, the institution country must be within the EU, an associated EU country, and must not coincide with the country in which the requested TA research infrastructure is located. So the requirements we've seen before must be within the EU, one of those associated countries, and must not be the same as where they're applying to. There should be just a short description of the different organizations. So if we have people collaborating from different research infrastructures, or different universities as part of the user group, just to give a description of the organization, relevant projects, publications, experience in the past, to show that why this team or why this group is makes sense to have to work together on this particular project. An important thing to note then in the case of user groups is one of the objectives of the European Commission in particular is to reach new users. So obviously, if we take a lot of steps back, you would think that if the European Commission has research funding as part of Horizon Europe, and they would like to conduct research on these different topics of earthquake engineering, wind engineering, geotechnical engineering, the obvious solution would be to have direct projects in which people like at our university here or in Genoa, for example, would apply and directly do the research. Okay, would apply for this funding, be successful, and do the research directly. But this kind of project that we're looking at here in ERIES is slightly different. It's because one of the objectives is to reach and go beyond, let's say, people who would have a lot of experience and a lot of experience in doing research projects. It's to access and have new users, okay, to have as many of those as possible. So just to notice something that in future calls, some preference will be given to proposals where new users are applying over people who have maybe been successful in past calls. So, for example, past applications which have just been evaluated. If there is new users applying to the next call, there will be some differentiation between who has already been successful and who has already have some participation in the ERIES project compared to some new user groups that could potentially be involved. The research infrastructure is not to get too much into this again. This is stuff that I've mentioned already. So what you would need to do here in your application form is just to give it a detail about which research infrastructure you wish to apply to. So you are strongly advised to make contact with the research infrastructure prior to making the application so that they're aware that you are thinking about doing some testing at their laboratory, and they can give you some technical feedback on your proposal preparation. Okay, so this is one of the first steps, and also you would need to describe in your proposal why you picked that research infrastructure, why it makes sense to do your project at that particular research infrastructure. In the case of wind tunnels, for example, this is a kind of testing facility which is available at one or more of the partners in the project. We have the same situation in seismic engineering. We have a few shaking tables, so it may be possible that a single user application could be possibly done in more than one laboratory. Okay, so we've given some space here as well to mean that you can put your first preference, but also you can give a second preference saying that, okay, I would like to go to this particular wind tunnel to do my testing, but if, for example, there is no more funding available for that particular wind tunnel, it's also possible to do it in this other one. So I would be more than happy to do it there as well, if it were possible. So there's some flexibility to try and accommodate and make sure that the best result is achieved for everybody. So this is just the difference between the first and second preference. So yeah, this is what I mentioned already. You must specify the research infrastructure that best suits the scope of the proposed research. Justification should be provided on the test setup, testing method, equipment, past experience. Some details about if there's some who intends to provide what. For example, if the user group wants to bring some particular specimen of their own, or if they want to, if they would like to contribute, for example, or if they're expecting the research infrastructure to cover all of the costs of the application. So this is an important thing for a costing perspective, so that the partners can have an idea of what exactly is expected of them, and also can have an idea of the costs of doing this kind of project, so that they can be sure that it is within the available budget that they have. Okay. So this is the first part is related to where you would like to go and do it, and then there will be an actual summary, state of the art, and description of the proposal. So we'll get through these in a few moments now. So the first one, if we look at the case of the summary, is just a general summary of the project. What is the scope and what do you expect to achieve? And then the state of the art, I think this could be relatively self-explanatory. And then in the case of the proposal, the objectives, what you hope to achieve, the testing specimen, so specifying the type of research infrastructure and test setup needed, other points about the materials, the scale of the specimen, any points, any special requirements, and things like that, and also the program. So how long you think it will take you to test the specimen. So basically giving an idea of what it is you plan on doing. Also, some things to kind of give some more context to your proposal that we're asking people to justify and explain the relevance of their project to the ERIES research areas and research goals. So this is the stuff I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, that we have, let's say, these categories, or how we can try to fit all of the different applications that we receive into the different research areas and research goals of the project. We have some information about the innovation and impact. So what exactly is the originality and innovation of the proposed research? Synergy with ongoing research. So describe how this maybe fits in with some bigger research that you have currently going on, and how maybe some overlap could be solved between these different projects, and also how you intend to disseminate and exploit the results. So this is an important part as well. It's very nice to do very good research, but also we need to put that stuff out there, and what you intend to do as part of that. In the case of the scheduling, this is relatively simple, but it's just to give an idea of the when they would like to start, if they have a particular preference for the month, the year. This is essentially for laboratory scheduling. It's not so easy just to decide to do testing tomorrow. These things take time to plan. How much time in terms of duration you would expect to occupy the lab, and also the access that will be provided. Okay, so an access day, these are some general descriptions of what exactly is meant by the different days. When you're working on something in your home country, it's not exactly an access day. You're working on the project, but you're not occupying the laboratory. Okay, so that's all that's meant there, and some basic description of like a Gantt chart, essentially, to describe the different steps of the project. Okay, so the design of the test specimen, the actual construction, and the testing, and so on. This is just some general information, 1 or 2 pages maximum. It's not very detailed. It's just to give an idea of what exactly is expected. In the case of the organizations and the user groups, this is a Microsoft Excel sheet. So it's very similar to what I mentioned before about the user group leaders and the user groups. It's essentially just collecting all of the names of the people who are anticipated to be involved. So first you would list the organizations, like the university, who's applying, and possibly different universities as well who are collaborating. And then in the case of the user group, this would just be the list of the people from those universities who are going to be involved, and just some details about them, about their names, emails, and so on. The same thing with the CVs. So there's obviously Annex B is the CV of the user group leader. It's the maximum of 3 pages. So it's just some basic information about the background of these people, and also the CVs of the different user group members can be attached as well. There's the main focus, obviously, in Annex B is the CV of the user group leader, and then the Annex C is just to give some complementary information about the other members of the user group. Okay. So the evaluation process. So once you apply and you submit all of your documents, what actually happens then, and how does this stuff work? So we can give an idea of a few slides on the graphics of the actual process that we have just been through in the past 2 weeks to evaluate these. So let's say you have put together a proposal, submitted, and then you want to know what happens now. Okay. So what happens now is all of these different user groups will ideally make interaction prior to submission with the different research infrastructures. So these external people would be saying, oh, okay, I would like to prepare a proposal to the EU Center, for example. So I should make context, maybe explain with the relevant people there about what I intend to do, if everything's okay from a costing perspective, technical perspective, and that everything makes sense. You would submit this application to the coordinator, who's you're looking at him right now, and essentially what I would be doing then is distributing the different applications based on the application received. So, for example, if there's an application looking at wind engineering, it would obviously go to the relevant people of the selection and evaluation panel, and the same thing for seismic, the same thing for geotechnical. Okay, so it goes out for review. It's almost like peer review. At the same time, we'll be asking for confidential feedback from the different research infrastructures to the evaluation panel. So if you imagine an external panel member is evaluating this proposal, who's going to go and do work in another research infrastructure. Obviously, they would like to know the opinion of that research infrastructure before approving or rejecting this proposal, because it may seem scientifically wonderful as a proposal, but on a technical level or a costing level, it may be completely unrealistic. So it may not even fit inside the laboratory. It may cost 10 times too much, and so on and so forth. So there's some interaction between the evaluation panel and the research infrastructure. What happens then is there's some individual reports get compiled, and overall feedback is provided back to the user groups. And now the actual selection starts to happen. So this is where we have, I mentioned we have 4 different proposals, which have been evaluated by our selection and evaluation panel. They've all received a score and a general recommendation. So we'll see what the general recommendation means in a moment. The scoring of these is essentially going to be based on the criteria which are shown on the slide here. So it's essentially looking at the quality of the user group, the relevance to the ERIES project, the originality, advancement of the frontier knowledge, justification with respect to the state of the art, importance for European development, and so on and so forth. And then the last 3 items you see here is the cost and feasibility according to the laboratory, to the research infrastructure, and the availability of anything else, and the importance as well to that research infrastructure scientific interest. So we can see how there is an evaluation from the selection and evaluation panel, but also from the research infrastructure that you are applying to. So people will have their say in what they think are the best and most worthy projects. In the case of, and this is to work out the overall score. So the scoring that we saw on the previous slide, this would be the first column here. Then we see the overall recommendation. And this is more like a general feeling that the evaluation panel can give to the different proposals. And it's more or less, let's say, to give some flexibility and also some rational decision making for the different proposals received. And the idea is to have some kind of a similar structure to what we get in journal publications. So like a minor revisions, major revisions, an encouragement to resubmit, or just a rejection. So depending on the colors you're seeing here, the first one would essentially be an application with maybe just some minor clarifications are needed to be incorporated into the application. The second one would be a major revision. So let's say some technical things that need to be changed or adjusted, but still it's still a good project and can be approved. Just only these 2 recommendations would be projects that would be, the first 2 would be ones that would be considered acceptable for the current call. Okay, so if we're evaluating proposals right now, it's just these first 2 which would be admissible. Okay, the second 2 would be there would be the first case of rejecting the proposal, but an encouragement to resubmit. So this would be the case. This happened with a couple of projects we received already, that very nice applications were received, but there was a lot of things that were not clear, maybe needed to be worked on again. And essentially what the selection and evaluation panel said, okay, it's very nice, but there needs some more work. So we will reject it now, but please submit this to the next call. And hopefully we can have a better project and a better result for everybody. So this would be the case of the orange dot we have here. So it's currently unacceptable, but obviously very positive feedback. And the very last one would be a proposal that would be considered just unsuitable for the project for many different reasons. So essentially the text here is what I've just explained to you now. But if we go back to the example we had a moment ago, we would see that the overall recommendations that these projects had, one was rejected as unsuitable. So immediately we do not consider that any further. And then we have a rejected but encouraged to resubmit. So this is also not good, but it's positive for the future. So it's not considered any further right now. And then we have the access, the projects that can be potentially awarded would be this proposal A or proposal B. So we need to see how much can we accommodate in the current round. And this is what we have called, let's say, available access. Not to get into the details of this table right now, but essentially what we have is that for all of the different partners or the research infrastructures and the installations, there's an available budget. The funding is not infinite. So what we want to do in this situation is we want to say, we expect to have 4 projects in this particular laboratory. We expect to have 2 projects because maybe it costs more, maybe we don't have enough funding for this, and so on and so forth. So the idea here is just to give an idea of how many projects we expect to fund. The idea then what we want to do is that instead of having all of the available, the access available at the very first call, and let's say many different people apply to exhaust all of the available resources in the first call. This would be good because you would have many different projects approved right away, but it's also not great for people like people who are maybe attending this webinar right now, who maybe weren't aware of the first call. So what we try to do here is to spread the available access out over the different calls. So saying that in the case of the very first installation, I can see here in the case of 90 Lab, we estimate a total of 4 projects. So what we said was over the 4 calls, we'll give 1 project for each call. Because if we gave all 4 projects at the first call, this would could potentially result in situations where all 4 projects are approved immediately and there's no more possibility for anybody else. So the idea is we want to have as much involvement from many different people as possible. So we're doing these kinds of webinars and spreading the access out to give a possibility or chance to everybody. So what does this mean? It means that in every call, there's only a limited number of spaces. So if we go back to the example we had before, we will see that we have 2 proposals that are potentially could work, but we would see that we only have we only have 1 space or 1 slot available for proposals in this current call. So this would essentially mean then that proposal A would be the one because it ranked higher in the score. It would be the one that gets approved, but proposal B, it's still a good proposal. It just didn't make the threshold. So what would happen in this case is that the user group would be informed saying that everything was approved, everything was nice, it didn't rank high enough. So what will happen? It will be automatically considered in the next call, but with the same scoring, the same evaluation. But if you want, you can make improvements, you can make adjustments based on the comments that the panel has provided. So it means that people will get a chance in the next call as well. Okay, so I think this is more or less it. So again, coming back to the project structure, it's not to get into this again because this is more agreements and legal side of things. But the very last part of this, and I think we'll stop then, is that I mentioned we have the European Commission who's assigning funding to us as a coordinator with this big consortium, and then we have the user groups who will be external people applying to the selection and evaluation panel, but also then there should be some kind of agreement between the successful projects, the successful applications, and the research infrastructure. So let's say I make an application, it's successful, there needs to be some kind of contract that gets signed there as well, or some kind of guarantee that the work is going to be done. And this is what we're calling the Transnational Access User Agreement. And it's let's say an agreement that gets signed between the successful applications and the actual laboratories that will be hosting them. And it just it's more of a formal document than anything else, but just to highlight that here very, very briefly. Obviously we're not getting into legal documentation right now, but just to mention that's how the relationship would be established then. Okay, so it's more of a possibly this is something to clarify as well, that successful applications would be going to do research at these laboratories, but everything would be essentially free of charge. So what does that mean? It doesn't mean that us as coordinators, we're going to give funding, we're going to fund other people. It just means that people would be invited and there would be no costs to those people to do that application that has been approved, because the funding is already going to be covering that from somewhere else. So it means that we're not going to be giving funding directly that people would need to justify and do their accounting and internal bookkeeping on. But it's something that would be handled internally by the ERIES project. And the only thing that would really need, the only point of interaction would be this user agreement, in which we would, the laboratory would say, okay, yes, this is the work that needs to be done. These are the different tests that will be conducted. This is the limit in terms of access days that we have. And this is the limit in terms of costs, for example, just to set some formal agreement in place between the external users and the hosting research infrastructure. And that is essentially it. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gerard. Thank you for your nice and comprehensive presentation. I think you have covered basically everything, especially in the application process part. And you clarified some doubts that one may have had, and also showed good motivations, I would say, and reasons to apply to get these grants. So if someone else still doubts this, we have some time for a question to Gerard.
I can see a hand raised by
Bruno.
Bruno.
Yeah, I see Bruno.
Yes, good
morning. Go ahead.
Good morning. I would like to start by thanking Professor O'Reilly for his excellent presentation. I think he cleared a lot of the elements that were important for these applications. I just have two doubts that I just wanted to clarify if possible, and it's regarding, let's say, the expected limits in terms of funding and the approximate size of the user group.
Sure. So in the case of the user group, this is probably the easiest question to answer. The user group, there is no limit essentially on that. You can have 4 researchers or 14. Obviously, if you get too big, it becomes a little bit difficult to manage a group like that. And this is something that the panel noticed and said to some people in the past applications, that just maybe it could be a little bit of a challenge to coordinate such a big group. But on paper, there is no limit to the number of user groups. Obviously, there needs to be some kind of justification of why you need so many people to do a research project. If you have 10 different universities, it may seem a bit strange to have that many people. There is a limitation that I didn't mention this. I thought it was in a slide, but I'll mention it now. So in the case of the user group, so I mentioned the countries that are admissible, the ones that can apply. Using the example of the European Union and the associated countries and so on. But that does not exclude the possibility of external people. So let's say people from Argentina was an example, Australia, Japan, places like that can be involved in the project. The limitation is that at least 60% of the user group still needs to be from the eligible countries. So let's say we have everybody from France, Italy, Spain, Germany, European countries who are naturally can apply to this project. They can have people from the US, from Canada, from Japan, but they cannot exceed 40% of the user group number of people. So let's say we have 10 researchers, we need to have at least 6 of those from those countries. Going to your second question then about the limits on costs and access and so on. This is something that really depends on the laboratories in particular. So I would highly suggest to be in contact with the laboratory to explain exactly what you want to do, and they will be able to give you an idea of the available resources, because every laboratory has a different budget and different costs, of course. But this is something that it's very difficult to generalize. But if you speak with the laboratory director or the reference contacts, all of these reference contacts are listed on the website. So you will find a page in which there is a technical description of each facility and also a reference contact there. So if you contact that person, they're expecting to receive queries about possible projects. So the limitations would be set by them essentially. Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much for the clarification.
Thanks.
Any other question?
I have one, if I may.
Sure.
Thank you, Gerard, for the nice and clear presentation. I only want two questions to make it to have two clarification.
Sure.
So the first one is if the group leader group leader should have any constraint on his role, on his position, on the university position, or on base of the age. And the second one is if one proposal can apply for more than one research area, or if it is more advisable to include in the proposal a single research area for the project.
So on your second question, the research area, it's not intended to be a limit. Let's say that you must put it as one of them. You can check. In fact, the Google form will let you check multiple boxes. And the idea is just to say that what I'm doing touches these different areas. That's essentially it. It's to categorize what you're doing and to show how it matches what we have in mind as the bigger picture of ERIES. The first question then on the user group leader. So yes, maybe this is a good point, given that we're looking at the young researchers essentially of wind engineering in Italy here as part of this webinar. There is a slight limit, but I don't think it's a big one, in the sense that the leader should be at least a postdoctoral researcher above. So a PhD student, for example, cannot apply for a grant. It would ideally be a postdoctoral researcher or assistant professor, lecturer, and so on, junior researcher, senior researcher, but essentially more or less staff, not students of the university. This would be the only requirement. Obviously, PhD students can be involved in the research proposals, and master's students even as well, but not as the user group leader. Okay.
And Gerard, just to clarify, I think you already clarified it, but just to make sure, when you mention also in respect to what Bruno asked before, when you mention about the fact that most of the users in the group have to be from an eligible country, we are talking about the institution, right? Not the country of.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So, for example, like I use an example of an American researcher working in Spain. On paper, it's a Spanish researcher.
Exactly. Yes. Okay. And I have a couple of questions as well. One is about you mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that it is possible to attach a presentation to the application up to 5 slides, if I'm not wrong.
Yes.
And what does it have to be included in this presentation, basically?
There is no format, anything you wish.
Okay.
There's no, it's free format, free to do with whatever you like. So a lot of people have given essentially sketches, so some rough diagrams of dimensions and so on that could be better explained with a slide or even an animation, for example. But there's no requirement for that.
Dimensions, you mean about the models?
Yes. For example, just to give an idea that we expect it to be 5 meters by 4 meters or something like that. We should clarify as well that obviously when you're preparing a proposal like this, there should be a good idea of what exactly you want to test. Like, I would like to test a residential building with 2 stories, for example. I would like it to be this scale so that it fits within the laboratory. Obviously, in the case of this kind of application, we're not expecting to have everything designed to a very fine level of detail at this stage of the proposal. This is something that can be carried out afterwards. We did not need final details of drawings of member dimensions and reinforced concrete steel profiles and things like that. If we think about buildings, these are kinds of details that can be clarified afterwards. When we think about the slide, we think about, it's not very conceptual, but you're leaning a bit more on that side, that the general concept is this: we want to look at this because this should have this relative size, and so on and so forth. So there's no specific thing we're looking for, but it's just to really give people the opportunity to explain themselves better if they feel like. I'm giving one example of giving more diagrams, but people may feel that they can explain their project a bit better in different ways. So there's no requirement there or restriction.
Okay. And the other one was about in the research goals of the project. The last one is green and the sustainable development.
Sure.
Can you make an example of a possible application?
So if it's a very open open to go. So maybe this is why you're asking, but it's open in the sense that we want to keep it. It was something that's obviously it's a very hot topic in research now, at least in the stuff that I'm seeing in my own research area. It's to at least promote the idea that we're not focusing on traditional stuff, that we're at least thinking forward, and some space should be given to things like that. So if I'm thinking about the built environment, for example, new retrofitting techniques, like, you know, for example, in Italy right now, there's this thing called the super bonus, where people are maybe focusing on the energy retrofitting of their houses, but what is that energy retrofit? It could be some kind of new system, new construction system that has very good energetic properties, and this would fit this kind of criteria, that you can have a very good seismic performance, wind performance, but also is very good from a energy performance perspective. Also, then you have the sustainable side of things. Is it sustainable materials? How is this going to contribute a little bit back to a sustainable development? Because this is something we should maybe be a little redirecting, not changing our research, but just making sure we keep this kind of thing take this stuff into account. So it doesn't need to be the main focus, but it's more a thing that we hope people will keep in mind. Okay. Yes. I don't have a specific example, but it's just that general spirit of research should be at least keeping those things in mind.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Any other question? If not, I think we can thank very much again Gerard, Professor O'Reilly, for his nice presentation.
And thank you all.
And thank you very much to all of you to have joined this webinar. See you next time, everybody.
Yeah, if I will pass the information to the organizers. If you have any information, the information about and if you have any questions, the information about the website and email addresses, everything is in these slides. So don't hesitate to visit the website, contact us, anything like that. So we're more than happy to answer your questions. Okay.
Thank you again.